It begins on a morning when the city forgets how to breathe. Not because of sirens, not because of riots, but because millions of people wake up to the same notification. Monthly basic allowance, delayed. At first it feels like a glitch, an inconvenience in a world where everything is automated, instant, frictionless. But then the streets begin to thicken, quietly, slowly, like a shadow filling a room. People line up outside state distribution centers, clutching the only card that still matters, the government-issued allowance card, the one lifeline they were told would guarantee freedom. A promise built on the illusion of certainty, but today, the card doesn't work. A mother tries it at a terminal, declined. A man behind her tries, declined. The line begins to tremble with the suppressed panic of people who suddenly realize how dependent they've become. Their wallets are empty. Their savings evaporated years ago when the old economy collapsed under its own weight. Their jobs, automated. Their options, gone. All that remains is the free money that once felt like salvation. Now they stand in silence, staring at screens that refuse to blink back. And this is where the story truly begins, not with prosperity, but with paralysis. Because dependence doesn't collapse loudly. It collapses inward, like a lung punctured from the inside. For years, governments told people this system would protect them. They said automation would liberate humanity from meaningless labor. They said UBI would be the safety net woven into a golden future. No one questioned the slow erosion of alternatives. No one noticed when the last private bank closed its final cash window. No one cared when physical currency was quietly phased out. Life was comfortable, predictable, effortless. But comfort is the most effective form of sedation, and sedation always comes before capture. The truth is this: the collapse didn't happen today. It began long before anyone queued outside those distribution centers. It began the moment people accepted a single source of income controlled by a single authority with a single switch. Today is merely the moment they realize it. A whispered dread spreads as the crowd starts to understand the implications. If the system pauses for a day, they don't eat. If it pauses for a week, they lose their homes. If it pauses indefinitely, the world they've built around this free money evaporates. The modern economy, rebuilt around guaranteed allowances, shudders, then groans under the weight of its own fragility. Businesses that rely on predictable government payments freeze. Delivery networks halt. Digital marketplaces flicker offline. Every dependency reveals another dependency, forming a chain that leads back to one central node. The node that has now gone dark. People start to ask questions they should have asked years ago. Who controls the system? Who decides when the payments run? What happens when that power is abused or simply fails? Nobody has answers. The agencies in charge issue vague statements blaming technical disruptions. But no one believes it, not anymore. The silence around the truth is louder than the chaos in the streets. Because deep down, everyone knows. Real power is the ability to grant survival or deny it. And by accepting free money, they surrendered that power willingly. A man in the line mutters, "They said this would never happen." But never is a word used by those who benefit from your trust. And trust is the first currency to collapse. As the day drags on, tempers flare. Food shelves empty by noon. People begin to trade old possessions, watches, headphones, jackets, for a loaf of bread or a bag of rice. The irony burns. A society built on the convenience of digital abundance is now reduced to bartering, like a civilization that forgot its own progress. Yet amidst the panic, one truth crystallizes. Everyone saw this coming, but no one wanted to believe it. They ignored the early warnings. They ignored the historical echoes. They ignored the simple, brutal logic. If someone gives you everything, they can take everything away. And now, standing in a city that no longer trusts its own heartbeat, the people face a question more terrifying than the collapse itself. What happens when the only lifeline you have is in the hands of someone who doesn't have to answer to you? The screens remain frozen, the lines grow longer, The fear becomes tangible, almost metallic in the air. This is not the end of the world. It is the end of the illusion that the world was ever yours. The collapse unfolding today is not unique. It is not unprecedented. It is not even surprising, at least not to history. Because history has seen this pattern before, again and again. Empire after empire, regime after regime. The formula changes its name, its symbols, its justifications. But the underlying blueprint is identical. Promise the masses something for nothing, then use that promise to shape their dependence. And dependence, once achieved, becomes the purest form of control. To understand the trap of free money, we need only follow the echoes of civilizations that walked this path long before us. It begins in ancient Rome, an empire drowning in its own ambition. As the Republic decayed, the emperors discovered a powerful political weapon: grain subsidies. Bread, wine, entertainment. The infamous panem et circenses. At first it felt like generosity, a way to ease the pressure on the poor, soften economic inequality, maintain civic order. But what began as relief transformed into reliance. When the people depended on the state to feed them, the state gained something far more precious than loyalty. It gained obedience. Citizens who relied on imperial grain thought twice before questioning imperial authority. The hand that filled their stomachs also tightened around their freedoms. And when the empire faltered, when supply routes failed, when corruption hollowed the system from within, Rome's population was left helpless, unable to sustain itself without the rations that had defined its existence. Dependency sedates ambition. Dependency erodes agency. Dependency makes resistance unthinkable. The pattern reappears in the feudal economies of the Middle Ages. Serfs did not receive money, but they received protection, land use, and harvest shares. They were told, "You owe nothing, everything you have is granted." But in truth, everything they had was owned by someone else, someone who could revoke it. Their survival was a gift, and a gift that can be revoked is not a gift at all. It is a chain disguised as mercy. Fast forward centuries, and the same mechanism resurfaced during wartime ration economies. Governments, facing shortages, centralized distribution of food, fuel, clothing. Citizens were promised fairness and stability. They accepted ration books and state-controlled prices as temporary necessities. But temporary control has a habit of becoming permanent. The moment survival is routed through a single gatekeeper, autonomy is no longer organic. It becomes conditional, regulated, monitored. The stories vary, the outcomes do not. Every free provision system in history follows a three-step law as consistent as gravity. Step 1. The promise. A governing authority offers something essential: food, safety, land, income. The message is wrapped in compassion, progress, or inevitability. People welcome it. After all, who refuses help? Step 2. The dependence. Slowly, the population restructures its life around the provision. Personal responsibility atrophies. Economic alternatives disappear. Old opportunities fade. What was offered as a supplement becomes the foundation. Step 3. The control. Once dependence is complete, the authority gains the final card: conditional survival. Disagreement becomes dangerous. Independence becomes impossible. Compliance becomes the only rational choice. This cycle, the promise, the dependence, the control, forms the backbone of every empire that drifted from freedom into quiet systemic domination. It is not tyranny in the theatrical sense, no chains, no whips, no iron bars. It is tyranny through comfort, through convenience, through the gentle erosion of self-reliance. And each time, the transition is invisible until it is irreversible. People rarely see the cage until the door closes. The tragedy is that the pattern always feels different in the moment. Rome believed it was securing its social harmony. Medieval serfs believed they were protected by divine order. Citizens during ration economies believed they were helping their nation survive existential threats. In every era, people justified control because the alternative seemed too uncertain, too chaotic, too frightening. But control disguised as comfort is still control, and history is merciless toward societies that forget this. The instant a population becomes comfortable being provided for by a central authority, that authority gains the power to redefine the conditions of their survival. And once survival can be redefined, it can be restricted, it can be directed, it can be weaponized. The pattern is ancient, predictable, mechanical, and yet every generation believes they will be the exception. But history does not grant exceptions. It only repeats the lessons we refuse to learn. The world today stands on the same threshold Rome once crossed. The same threshold empires crossed when they traded autonomy for stability. The same threshold societies crossed when they accepted provisions they could no longer live without. The question isn't whether UBI is generous or cruel, efficient or wasteful, progressive or regressive. The real question is whether humanity has ever survived a system that centralizes survival in the hands of the few and promises it will never be abused. Because the past makes one thing brutally clear. What begins as help always returns as control. History rhymes, but it never repeats politely. And today, the rhyme is unmistakable. What Rome did with grain, what feudal lords did with land, what wartime governments did with ration books, modern states are now doing with something far more intimate, far more powerful, and far more irreversible. Digital money tied directly to your identity, your behavior, and your compliance. Universal basic income is marketed as progress, as compassion, as a human right in a world where automation has devoured entire industries. But beneath the polished language lies a mechanism older than empires, the centralization of survival. The illusion of novelty is what blinds us. We think UBI is different because it is digital, efficient, futuristic. We think it exists in a world with apps, algorithms, blockchain dashboards, and biometric logins. And so it must belong to a different category than ancient subsidies or medieval privileges. But the form has changed, not the function. Rome handed out grain. Governments handed out ration stamps. The new system hands out numbers on a screen, and screens are far easier to control. UBI does not exist in isolation. It is woven into a new ecosystem, one built to monitor, predict, and influence human behavior with a precision previous civilizations could only dream of. The mechanisms once used to manage food lines are now embedded in code, linked to identity systems, and enforced by invisible infrastructure. Take CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, currencies that can be tracked, traced, frozen, reprogrammed. Money that is not held, but accessed. Money with an off switch. Combine that with digital ID systems tied to biometric data, geolocation, purchase histories, and AI-driven behavior scoring, and suddenly UBI evolves from an economic tool into a behavioral leash. The past used chains of iron, the present uses chains of data, and data does not break. We've seen early versions of this already. Social credit systems that reward obedience and punish dissent. Payment networks that freeze accounts with a single command. Algorithms that label individuals as risks, threats, or anomalies. The infrastructure is not theoretical, it is operational, tested, scaled, normalized. All it needs now is a universal payout mechanism to guarantee user adoption. Enter UBI, the perfect delivery system, the perfect Trojan horse, the perfect parallel to every historical dependency trap, but wrapped in the aesthetics of progress. Just as Rome's citizens depended on imperial grain, modern citizens could soon depend entirely on state-issued digital allowances. But unlike Rome, where grain had to physically exist, digital money does not need to be grown, harvested, or transported. It only needs approval. It only needs a tap of a button from an institution that does not answer to the people it governs. Dependency becomes effortless. Control becomes seamless. Compliance becomes automatic. And this time, there is no black market to escape into, no alternative currency of gold or grain, no neighboring village untouched by the system. When money itself becomes programmable, autonomy becomes a myth. When survival is granted in digital form, dissent becomes a luxury no one can afford. We are told the future will be frictionless. What they do not say is that frictionless often means permission-based. The parallels intensify when we look at the cultural narrative. Every empire justified its provisions with noble rhetoric, fairness, stability, equality. Today the narrative is framed around compassion for displaced workers, safety nets for the vulnerable, and resilience against technological disruption. The message is the same one Rome used when citizens lost their farms to consolidation. Do not worry, we will take care of you. But care always comes with conditions. Already, prototypes of digital welfare programs deny access based on scoring systems, carbon scores, health compliance, political stances, criminal prediction algorithms. The line between assistance and discipline blurs, and UBI, once universal, becomes selectively conditional. When the state becomes the wallet, the state becomes the judge. The disturbing truth is this: humanity has never been closer to a fully integrated control grid, one that can regulate not just what you buy, but when, where, and why. And UBI fits into this grid, not as a benevolent offering, but as the final piece required to make participation mandatory. The parallel is no longer metaphorical, it is architectural, structural, deliberate. We are walking the same path as past civilizations, just with better lighting, smoother interfaces, and more persuasive slogans. But the outcome, if the pattern holds, is as predictable as gravity. Dependence leading to obedience, obedience leading to compliance, compliance leading to quiet, systemic domination. The only difference is this: Rome's chains were visible, ours dissolve into convenience. For years, people believed the story they were told, that UBI was a social good, a safety net, a humanitarian miracle engineered by leaders who cared. But under every promise lies a pattern, and under every pattern lies a design, and under that design lies a hand, one that never intended to give freedom, only to disguise control. The revelation arrives not in a single moment, but in a series of quiet realizations, each one sharper than the last. Realization 1. The system was built too perfectly. Every institution, governments, central banks, tech conglomerates, aligned with uncanny coordination. The same organizations that could not fix infrastructure, manage budgets, or prevent crises somehow had the precision to design a seamless digital ecosystem linking identity, money, behavior, and governance. A system with no gaps, no escape routes, no off-grid alternatives. That level of uniformity is not compassion, it is architecture. Realization 2. The infrastructure came first. The narrative came later. Digital ID, biometric scanners, centralized databases, programmable currencies, these existed long before the public discussion of UBI gained momentum. The pipes were laid before anyone asked for water. The cage was built before anyone volunteered to step inside. Realization 3. The beneficiaries were never the people. Follow the money, and it flows upward. Follow the data, and it funnels inward. Follow the power, and it consolidates into a small circle of entities that operate above democratic accountability. Central banks gained direct access to citizens' transactions. Governments gained real-time visibility into every financial decision. Tech giants became the custodians of identity itself. The elites didn't adapt to UBI, they engineered it. Not because they believed in equality, but because they recognized a historic opportunity. The ability to control populations without physical force, without violence, without protest, using only the promise of money that wasn't really free. This is the part no one wanted to see. UBI was not created to save people from economic collapse. Economic collapse created the conditions needed to justify UBI. The solution was prepared before the crisis. The script was written long before the actors took the stage, and the trap was elegant. Destabilize the old economy with automation, consolidation, and engineered scarcity. Introduce UBI as the humane solution to the chaos. Tie UBI to digital currencies that cannot be withdrawn, accumulated, or used freely. Attach conditions, carbon limits, social scores, health compliance, permitted purchases, normalize monitoring as a moral duty, close all exits. People accepted each step because each step felt like help. But help was never the point. At the center of this revelation is a mechanism so efficient it borders on sinister: programmable allowance money. The elite no longer need to dictate laws, censor opinions, or enforce obedience. They control the bloodstream of society. It's money. And once money becomes programmable, so does the population. If you say the wrong thing, your spending power decreases. If you travel too far, your mobility is restricted. If you purchase something outside approved categories, the system politely denies the transaction. No prison, no trial, just silence. A soft, clean, clinical authoritarianism. The elites positioned themselves as benevolent caretakers while building something closer to a behavioral labyrinth. They convinced people to trade autonomy for convenience, privacy for safety, independence for fairness. And once the dependence was complete, they no longer needed to ask for trust. They simply replaced it with compliance. The greatest trick of modern power is that it does not look like power. It looks like an app, a dashboard, a direct deposit, a cheerful notification that reminds you how much the system has given you, while hiding how much it has taken. The people were told they were receiving freedom, but freedom does not come with terms and conditions. The people were told they were becoming equal, but equality is meaningless when the gatekeepers remain untouched. The people were told they were being cared for, but care that can be withdrawn is not care, it is leverage. And now, as the facade crumbles, a single haunting realization emerges. The elites never wanted control of your money. They wanted control of your dependence. And once they owned that, they owned you. The revelation is simple, brutal, unignorable. UBI was never the gift. The gift was the illusion. The control was the plan. There is a moment, after every collapse, when the dust settles just enough for truth to become visible. Not the truth crafted by institutions, not the truth printed on official statements, but the truth that rises from the rubble, undeniable and uninvited. And the truth now is this: the system may be powerful, but it is not omnipotent. Its reach is vast, but not infinite. Its control is sophisticated, but not final. Because the elite made one critical miscalculation. They built an empire on dependence, forgetting that dependence collapses the moment people remember they can stand on their own. The inevitability they fear most is not rebellion, it is awakening. And awakening always begins quietly. It begins with the realization that survival does not have to flow through a central authority. For centuries, before the digital leash, before the programmed allowance, before the monetized compliance, communities built their own resilience through cooperation, trade, shared labor, and assets rooted in the real world. It begins with the recognition that decentralization is not a buzzword, it is a lifeline. A structure that distributes power instead of concentrating it. A system where the failure of one node does not collapse the whole. Where money is not a signal of obedience but a tool of exchange. Where identity is private, not monitored. Where wealth is earned, not granted with terms and conditions. The people who once stood in the endless lines of UBI distribution centers begin to see the pattern for what it is, a trap disguised as mercy. And once a trap is recognized, it loses its advantage. Fear becomes knowledge. Knowledge becomes clarity. Clarity becomes action. Some begin to rebuild networks outside the sanctioned system. Local economies, parallel markets, shared resources, skill-based communities. Some return to hard assets, tangible value that cannot be digitally frozen or behaviorally restricted. Some embrace decentralized currencies, not because they are trendy, but because they are sovereign. The system can throttle digital money, but it cannot throttle human cooperation. It can freeze accounts, but it cannot freeze ingenuity. It can control access, but it cannot control imagination. And imagination is the birthplace of every revolution that does not need violence to change the course of history. The inevitability is not that UBI will fail or succeed. The inevitability is that people will eventually understand it for what it is, a tool, not a destiny, a mechanism, not a mandate, a cage whose door is only locked as long as you choose not to touch it. The elites may have designed a financial panopticon, but they overlooked the simplest principle of all human systems. Control requires consent. Consent requires belief. And belief evaporates the moment people see the wires behind the magic trick. What comes next is not guaranteed, but it is possible. A world where money is decentralized, where identity is sovereign, where automation frees people instead of enslaving them, where technology serves humanity instead of managing it, where communities generate their own security, their own economies, their own dignity. A world where free money is replaced by something far stronger, free choice. Yes, UBI may become global. Yes, governments may tighten their grip. Yes, surveillance may expand and control may deepen. But beneath that growing shadow, a counterforce spreads, quiet, steady, undeniable. The understanding that freedom does not die when systems tighten. It dies when people stop realizing they can walk away. And now, more than ever, people are beginning to understand. The trap is visible. The illusion is broken. The dependence is no longer silent. And in this new clarity, one truth echoes like a warning and a promise. The only free money is the money you do not depend on. And the only freedom that lasts is the freedom you rebuild yourself.